What is the prettiest song you ever heard in your life? Gymnoptes, Eric Satie. Vincent, Starry, Starry Night, by Don McLean. The Night We Met, Lord Huron. White Winter Hymnal. Not really the prettiest lyrics if you know what it's based on, however the flow is just so calm. Harvest Moon by Neil Young. I fell in love with Scarborough Fair by Simon and Garfunkel as a kid, and I still have a soft spot in my heart for it. Edit, thanks for my first award, S. I can't wait to listen to all the covers of the song and other S&G songs you've suggested. Annie's Song by John Denver. Barber's Adagio for Strings. At Last by Etta James. Both Sides Now, by Joni Mitchell. Hoppy Paula by Sigur Ros. Time in a Bottle, Jim Croce. In My Life. Claire de Lune. Unchained Melody, Righteous Brothers. What weird flex you proud of? In the 1980s, there used to be a small ad every week in the back pages of the UK actors magazine The Stage, for a guy called David Burglass. It was just his silhouette, his name, his agent's phone number and the caption, International Man of Mystery. The simple genius of it was so giddying that I felt compelled to steal it when I wrote the program notes for one of the performers in a student comedy show I directed. Another performer in that show was a guy called Neil Malarkey, who went on to form a double act with a young Canadian comedian called Mike Myers. He and Mike both loved that phrase, but neither of them knew where I'd got it from, so Mike just stole it again. Decades later, I got in touch with David Burglass, then aged 90, via his son and apologized for nicking it. He got back to say he was delighted to find out how Mike Myers had come by that phrase, and told me I'm forgiven. He's still alive today and nearly 100 years old. Burglass was a truly great magician, a huge star of British TV in the 50s and 60s, and deserves acknowledgement for that brilliant strap line. I'm also sheepishly proud of my part in the chain of theft that led to Austin Powers. I have a sock drawer that's 72 of the same exact sock. I never have to fold them or dig around to make a matching pair. I got my braces off 7 years ago and I've worn my retainer every night since. I have hugged a penguin. I can write with either hand. Not such an impressive skill, but when my colleague remarked that my handwriting is beautiful despite using my dominant, right, hand to also type at the same time, it made me blush. It was indeed a very beautiful and calligraphic handwriting. I went to the dentist for the first time in 5 years last week for a cleaning/checkup. No cavities. When I was a little kid, multiple doctors said I would never be able to speak and that I would need assisted living for the rest of my life. Now I'm 16 and capable of taking care of myself, and I'm able to speak perfectly fine other than a slight stutter when I get really anxious. I've planted over 2 million trees. I bought the 2 first books of A Song of Ice and Fire from a dude in 1999 I met on Usenet. Couldn't find them in a bookstore. He said he had cases of them in his basement. And if I wanted them autographed? It was GRRM himself, and way before they got popular. Edit, some people have doubted this story and I promised to take a photo of the books, found only the first one, with a note of the username, to differentiate from other picture on internet. Ever so seldom, cute things really happen. I built and installed a bookshelf doorway with a hidden door handle myself. It leads into a room dedicated only to Dungeons and Dragons. Childhood dream achieved. I got a pity pat from Obama. This was ages ago when he was still just a senator from Illinois. I got a job at a local radio station as a reporter for news in the area. Obama was speaking at a community college in our area and I was told to listen to his address and ask relevant questions afterwards. I had never done that before, or since, and I barely listened, and at the end he met with the press, which was me and a local newspaper guy. After he finished with the other guy, he looks at me and says, "What can I do for you?" My mind went totally blank and I just stood there staring at him. This went on for a little too long and eventually he reaches out a hand, pats me gently on the shoulder and goes, "It's okay." And then walked off. LOL. I'm a psychiatric nurse, and I saved a man's life when he collapsed outside my apartment. It was during the height of COVID. I could hear people shouting, and I looked out the window to the scene of a man face down on the road and people standing around him in a panic. I shoved my PPE equipment on, I keep some at home for cleaning, and ran downstairs in my pajamas, no socks or shoes on. He wasn't breathing and had a massive cut on his head so deep you could see his skull. Nobody knew how long he was in cardiac arrest for. I managed to get his heart going again by myself. I had so much adrenaline going, and when the paramedics came I gave them the full handover as they took him away. The paramedics took my details in case the hospital wanted to contact me. A week later, I got a phone call from the man and his wife to say thank you for saving his life, and if I ever needed anything they would help me. After he went away in the ambulance and the adrenaline wore off, I cried my eyes out, praying he would be okay. I still think about him regularly and feel very proud of myself. Update, OMG you lovely, lovely people. Thank you so much for your kind words and for the awards. I'm not ashamed to admit I have cried as I read your comments. It's so nice to be appreciated by people. I also wanted to add in that if I had broken any of the man's ribs, I'm not 100% sure if he could or would have sued me as I was off duty. I would like to think that if another medical professional had driven past they would have done the same as me. Once again thank you for your comments. I have finished 3 full tubes of chapstick in my life. Not lost or missing. Finished to the end. I have an uncanny knack for remembering people, even people that I see very briefly. For example, I once saw a guy on the escalator in Toronto and I said, "Hey, when did you move here from Vienna?" He was flabbergasted. I had walked past him on the street once while visiting there and 5 years later I recognized him. I made a meme on a small subreddit and a couple hours later my buddy sent me my own meme not knowing I made it. What was the biggest lie you believed? I had dumped some gasoline in an Arizona tea bottle to get a fire started. My sister seen me pour it on fire and she freaked thinking Arizona iced tea was flammable. I went along with it saying, "You didn't know that? That's why it's called Arizona, because how hot it gets there." She was 20 years old. Around 5 years later we are camping and she says, "Who's got some Arizona I can use to start this campfire?" I looked at her and didn't understand. She explained. I told her it's flammable. I had no recollection. She says she has been telling everyone for the last 5 years how bad it is for you and how flammable it is. My dad got sick of having to listen to the kids' shows I watched as a child, so he told me that the Power Rangers and Barney the dinosaur died in the car crash with Princess Diana, so I couldn't watch them anymore. I didn't actually question it until I was quite old, embarrassingly. As a little kid, Dad told me that there was a Greek god of sex called Philadio. I'd never heard the word before. Then, freshman year of high school, took a mythology class and asked the teacher, in class, why we hadn't talked about Philadio. Silence. You know, the god of sex. I'm cringing hard just typing this out. Got a nice little talk after class and Dad almost peed his pants laughing that night. Edit, thanks for the love for my dad. He was always pulling bullshit like this until he died of cancer in 2015. I was frustrated with his playful bullshittery as a kid, until I was able to connect with him as a friend in my early 20s or so. He was really into wordplay and turning phrases, as well as Warhammer and WoW. I miss him, and this Philadio story always makes me smile. When I was like 16 I found out that one of my sisters wasn't actually my sister. She was actually just best friends with my oldest sister growing up, and she lived with my family from when she was like 12 or 13 through 18, she and my oldest sister are 15 years older than me. Unfortunately her parents wouldn't sign her over for adoption and didn't contribute anything for my mom raising her for 6 years. Weirdest part is that my family is predominantly fair-skinned, blonde with blue eyes, but the girl I thought was my sister was traditional Mexican with darker skin, dark hair, and brown eyes. My mom was always very tan and had darker hair throughout my childhood, so I thought that my other 2 sisters and myself were the odd ones out. Our family were poor and lived in a house where the ceiling plaster had bowed so much that it bowed down, bulging out. My dad told me that there was a World War II bomb buried in the ceiling. Believed it for years, absolutely terrified the entire time. That you need a license for children's parties. That was the reason why I never had a party when I was little growing up. You need to get a license from the post office, but there's only a certain amount of licenses available for that area. That acne would only be a problem when I was a teenager. When I was very young we had a pet hamster. He got out of his cage, so my dad put the cage in the basement thinking he might get hungry and get back in. One morning I woke up and there was the hamster in his cage in the usual place. I asked my mom how they found him and she told me she opened the door to the cellar and there he was dragging his cage back upstairs. It wasn't until I was a teenager and remembered the exchange that it occurred to me she obviously made that up. Outside of dumb lies your parents tell you as kids, my friend who worked at a gas station with a big food station that has some ground beef items told me they use kangaroo meat for their ground beef because it was cheaper than cow. I am gullible with my friends. That my dad moved out and rented a room in the house of a female friend for tax reasons. That my parents were married. Truth is my father was, just not to my mother. The microwave will explode if I put my face too close to it while it's heating food. My mom told me when I was 5 and my favorite dog died that it doesn't matter that dogs die, because in 7 years they respawn. So I was like, oh, fine, see you then bud, I will be older and we will play again. I'll fill up my car with gas before work tomorrow morning. When I was a kid my cousin convinced me for like an hour that her mom had won the lottery. I can still feel the loss of millions of dollars 2 decades later and that shit hurts brother. Why Jessica, why?